Hi. Okay, I had no idea what this was going to be like before I actually did it, so now I've watched everybody's presentation. I kind of want to do mine over, but we got to stick with what we've got. So my name's Terry Laban, and I'm going to talk tonight about the Philly comics scene. And a lot of people probably don't know that Philly even has a comics scene, but it does. And it's my position that comics scene is a great and important thing that really is an essential contributor to a city's cultural life. A little bit about myself. If I'm known for anything around here, it's for the daily comic strip that my wife and I do that appears in the Philadelphia Inquirer. It's called Edge City. This is our shot from our website, and then if you look in the Inquirer, if you ever pick up a newspaper, which I'm sure none of you do, but if you find it on the train, if you look on the comics page, we're right underneath the Piranha Club. But I actually come out of the indie comic scene of the 90s specifically, and I did 3 books then of my own, 2 for a publisher called Fantagraphics and 1 for a publisher called Dark Horse. And so I'm really into indie comics, small press stuff, not so much mainstream stuff, although I did do a lot of writing for mainstream comic companies also in the 90s. A lot of stuff for DC, and I also wrote Donald Duck comics for 14 years for a large company in Denmark. So I've wandered across comics and been involved with it for a long time. And I'm very interested about what goes on. I also have a company called Cartoon Impact. I do comics for education and marketing and promotion and all kinds of things like that. I also do infographics. Of course, I didn't put my URL up on the slide, but it's cartoonimpacts.com, should you be so curious as to go look. In any case, what good is a comic scene? I mean, why have one at all? Well, who cares? Comics have cultural cachet, especially right now. I mean, graphic novels and all these things. And comics have a higher profile than they've ever had. A thriving comic scene is an indicator of a cool city. I'm going to talk about a little bit more about that in a minute. And prominent comic styles can really enhance a city's visual brand. So cool cities, what's a cool city? Cool cities are places where young creatives want to live. Some of them are perennials. They've been cool for a long time. San Francisco and New York. And then every decade seems to have a few. In the 80s it was Minneapolis. In the 90s, Seattle and Austin. And now those other 3. What makes a city cool? Denseness and walkability, places to hang out like bars and coffee shops, character, man-made and natural beauty, affordability, interesting neighborhoods, other thriving artistic scenes, especially music it seems, a thriving high-tech center, interestingly enough, and other cartoonists. And these apply not just to cartoonists, but other artists too. But cartoonists seems to latch on to especially music and high-tech. Philly has all these things, plus it has a unique proximity to other cultural centers, which lets artists and sort of go up and interact with those other places physically, which is a really great thing that isn't found everywhere else. So what's happening now? Not so much forward, but what's happening now? Philly has, as I said, a very exciting and thriving comic scene with a lot of native-born cartoonists and a lot of cartoonists that are also have come here. And it's not exactly new. Philadelphia has never been a cartoon center, but some prominent cartoonists have come from here. Robert Crumb was born here, although he didn't do his famous stuff here, the 60s underground cartoonist. Charles Burns lives here now, a very famous indie guy, although he hasn't, as far as I know, really played a big part in the scene. But right now, there is a thriving scene with a lot of younger cartoonists, people in their 20s and 30s. It's supported, as all comic scenes are, by 2 comic shops in particular, Locust Moon in West Philly and Brave New Worlds in Old City. Locust Moon in particular has been very active and supportive of up-and-coming cartoonists. They sponsor the Locust Moon Comics Festival, which is happening in a couple weeks at the Rotunda. Really a great festival. It's all indie artists, all people doing individual and creative work, a lot of art stuff. Kind of a mini SPX, if you're familiar with that, the big comics convention in Washington that happens usually in September. Another great Philly cartoonist institution right now is the Philly Comics Jam. A bunch of youngish cartoonists, some not so young, that meet every last Tuesday of every month at Beer Stew in Old City right on 2nd Street. People just get together, they drink, and they pass around kind of a sheet with squares on it, and everybody kind of contributes drawings. And it's really a great networking thing. There's also a lot of comics publishers in Philly. Locust Moon is one of them, kind of on a smaller scale, but they've just come out this year with a really beautiful collection of cartoonists doing an homage to Winsor McCay's Little Nemo, famous comic strip from the early part of the century. Really kind of art comic thing. Yeah Dude Comics, this guy's a Philly jammer, a guy named Pat Alicio. He publishes his comics and other people's. I wish I'd put more people's work up there. But he does some very artsy stuff, kind of a little bit like Gary Panter, if you're familiar with him. He's the guy that designed Pee-wee's Playhouse. Another guy, Ian Harker, another Philly comics jammer. He does his imprint's called Sacred Prism. Again, he publishes a lot of other people besides just himself. And when I say publish, I mean they're doing some small editions of kind of mini comics. Another one, Retrofit Comics, headed by a guy named Box Brown. Really interesting guy. He just came out with a graphic novel about Andre the Giant. It was on the New York Times bestseller graphic novel list. Well, I don't know how many that actually is, but still a great achievement. Really one of the more prominent up-and-coming artists in this town. And one more, Dirty Diamonds, really interesting, all-women collective. And they do this anthology, comes out once every year, maybe twice a year, where people can submit. And they usually do it on a theme. This time it's beauty. They raised a bunch of money on Kickstarter to do the last one. It's a really great thing. So, wrapping up. A key part of the modern culture mix, Philly is a comic scene, and I think that Philly needs a thriving comic scene as much as it needs a thriving music or a visual art scene. And I think those things interact and sort of inform each other. And, you know, I think there's things the city might be able to do. Oh, Alex is up. But I think it's doing pretty good already, and I hope it translates.